What's up, guys? Welcome back to Dad Awesome. This is episode 180, and we've got Matthew Hooper joining us this week for the first half of the conversation with him. We're going a little shorter episodes this summer because it's summer. You've got fun things to do with your kids, so we're going to give you about a 20-minute episode this week and about another 20-minute next week. This conversation was so rich, so packed with actionable dad wisdom that we were like, let's break it into two parts. So today, episode 180, Matthew Hooper, friend of two of my friends. We're like, you've got to connect with him. He's from Northern California, so we did this interview through Zoom. But man, this conversation, it's got so many takeaways. I'm so thankful that you're joining us. And just a quick reminder, if you're not getting text messages from Dad Awesome, we want to nudge you guys. We want to be a resource that helps move you in the direction of becoming Dad Awesome. Just simply text this number, 651-370-8618. Just text the word dad, and we'll keep you in the loop on just encouraging nudges towards intentionality. That number one more time is 651-370-8618. Again, I'm so thankful you're joining us this week. Let's jump right into part one, the first half of my conversation with Matthew Hooper. And I thought as a fun setup question, jumping into adventure, and specifically this adventure you took your family on. And so as you kind of introduce your age of your kids and the season you're in of dad life, could you kind of set the stage for the adventure that you went on last year?
Yeah, so it all started when I turned 50 and we were on a vacation in Hawaii, Oahu, for my 50th birthday, just my wife and I and our three kids. And it actually was a vacation versus a family trip because our kids are old enough right now where it actually felt like a vacation rather than I'm managing little people running around and just home, but in a different location, So
I have no idea what that would feel like because I'm very much into managing little people.
So it was a sweet trip. When we were there, one of the things that my wife and I do often is just walk together. It's the number one activity for my wife and I to cultivate our connection is walking together as frequently as we can. On a walk, we kind of had a vision of, hey, this next year, this was pre-COVID, this next year, why don't we do something a little different? Why don't we be a little bit more mobile if we can? Because my job is I can work wherever I am. And because it's virtual, it's virtually based. So I'm like, why don't we do something? So we started envisioning that. We got home, COVID hit.
Yes.
And that kind of threw all of our plans to travel more, even overseas, and it just kind of threw a big ringer into our plans.
Yeah.
Well, sometime shortly after that, we started thinking about, well, what about doing something like a longer term trailer, SUV trailer trip? So we just started kind of walking with that. Could we do that? Is that even possible? What would that look like? And the ball just started rolling. Like, hey, this is good. We're going to homeschool our kids after, a few months of doing school at home. We're like, hey, we don't know what the fall is going to look like. Let's kind of turn the tide on kind of like just this season and let's do something unique and different. And that started us down a path of pursuing this 4-month, 48 state
48
SUV trailer trip around the country where I was meeting with some clients where I could around the country because I have clients all over the country, but meeting with clients, doing some workshops, but then also, connecting with family and friends as we went and trying to be really COVID savvy and careful, but also not let what was happening in our country totally just lock us into a pattern of life and behavior that we didn't necessarily have to stay in. Like we could be safe and be mobile because we're kind of social distancing and in our little pod, in our little trailer the whole time. It's like it was safer to go, because we would maybe that's not totally true. But
paint the picture though. It's a large SUV and a travel trailer. How big of travel trailer? And how many of you are on this trip?
Yeah, so there was 6 of us on this trip, my wife and I, and our 3 kids, Annie, who was 14 at the time, Brianna, who was 12, and then Jaron, who was 8. Okay. And then my niece, who was 19, she was on the trip with us as well. And so And then what we ended up choosing was an SUV, a Ford Expedition, and that was it's called a Max, a little bit longer, and it had this heavy duty towing package, so we could tow a little more weight.
Okay.
But we actually got with the tongue, it's like a 27-foot Outback ultralight travel trailer. So
Okay.
it could sleep 7, but I mean, the actual box of the trailer is more like 25 feet. So we were like packed in there pretty tightly. So the one thing my 15-year-old says is like, I will never do a trip like that again in that trailer.
Yeah, and
She's
that
like,
one.
at my
It's just
limit, Dad. You know, so
tight.
we were like tight in there, but we kind of needed to do that to like maximize our kind of like our towing capacity. Just the best setup was a little bit smaller trailer
Yep.
where we could make it work and feel great about it when we were driving and safe and and so that was kind of the
Wow, that's
setup.
that's the setup, and I'm gonna come back around to and go rapid fire like practical tips for a family
Yeah.
that decides to hit the road. But to go after, I know there's the practical side of what do you buy, how do you prepare, how do you pack, how do you approach travel, how many nights in each place, all that stuff. But then there's the heart preparation, and
Yes.
this is what came up from our mutual friend Skip a couple times, and Austin. They were like, they're like they mapped out the 48 states, but they also had another version of maps. And
Yeah. We,
and I love this. You said we chose 4 principles to order our thoughts and decisions. And I think this is important. Even if a family's not hitting the road, there's a lot of transferable principles here of do we choose or do we fall into our principles that guide us, right? To
yes.
order our thoughts and decision making. So you guys, was this your idea or your wife's idea to kind of
Yeah.
choose some principles?
Yeah, so this was my
Okay.
idea, and it actually bubbled out through a conversation with a friend who I meet with over Skype. We've been meeting together actually for, gosh, 16, 17 years now, almost weekly.
Hmm.
It was in person at first, now it's over Skype, but it came out of a conversation with him as we were just talking about like, okay, what should be ordering?
Hmm.
Well, I mean, how should we do this? You know, and so there was 4 kind of principles that we decided upon that would order our trip, like what we would practically do. And the first was missional, that would be kind of about the kingdom and just bringing Christ's kind of love and the peace and joy and life of the kingdom wherever we went, outside of us, but even kind of with us, because this is going to be a challenging journey for sure.
Hmm.
Something we'd never done before. Like I'd never driven a trailer before getting this trailer, so it was like a new experience for us all. So missional was the first
Yep.
ordering principle. Second
And
was
then
to
to
be
just
yeah,
to interrupt you for a moment, to dial in on missional for
yeah.
your 8-year-old son, because I just think about like what degree was that already a family principle before you hit the road, or was this actually kind of a new clarification of this is how we live? Like, was it new for your
Yeah.
8-year-old, or something you'd already talked about being missional?
No, I mean, I think the word missional, I think was new,
Mhm. Yep.
but our life,
Yeah.
it was more, it more flowed out of who we are as a family. Even us moving from Southern California to Northern California, which is where we live now, 4 years ago now, that was a missional pursuit, meaning we really experienced, and there's a whole story behind this, God like moving us in very concrete ways, directing us to move.
Wow.
And it was very clear. And
Cool.
so we with our kids have, I mean, this is how my wife and I are living, and we're inviting them into that journey with us, that we're going to be
Amazing.
missional with our lives. And so God may lead us somewhere differently, and that may be hard.
Yeah.
But we want to be open to God, either leading us somewhere differently or staying, but
Staying.
we want to be open and being missional,
Hmm.
meaning just seeking first the kingdom
Yep.
and how we do life, like the first order of things.
Yep.
So
Cool.
he would, so it fit with, he would say like, that's a different word for what we're already doing and kind of what our kids know about how we're going to live life.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So missional, purposeful was the first one. What's the second one?
Yeah, missional, being missional or kind of purpose filled. The second was adventurous, meaning to kind of push ourselves to do things we weren't normally doing, like hiking up some trail we've never been on and then going a different way down, which was kind of like unsure and scary. Like, let's just keep being adventurous
Yeah.
and having fun, enjoying that as we do, but pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones.
Mhm.
That was the adventurous. And the third thing was positivity. Like, hey, if we're going to be missional and adventurous, we need to stay positive,
Mhm.
because we know that at some point this experience is going to be, which is the S, stretching.
Stretching. Yeah.
And we're choosing to be stretched by going on this trip already.
Right.
So we already are in a stretch. So let's try to maintain positivity
And that's where your
as we're.
kids are like, well, maybe we should have stretched this RV and done a $200,000 trip. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Especially our 15-year-olds, like, what were we thinking? What were you thinking? It's like, so.
Did I cut you off though on stretching? Anything else to
Yeah.
add on the last one?
Yeah. There is this principle. I mean, this idea that life is stretching.
Mm.
And what we need to do is own that is true, and not live in an illusion that life is not that. So life is stretching. If we stayed here, there would be elements that would be stretching about that. If we go, that's going to be stretching, and maybe it'd even be more stretching. But the reality is life is stretching. So can we own that as a part of life and just work with that, and embrace it? Like, life is stretching and circumstances happen that impact us. We choose things that sometimes go well, sometimes don't. Life is stretching. Let's not live in an illusion that it's not, especially in a fallen world
Yep.
and all that's happening around us and our culture, whatever. This is a stretch. Life is stretching. So
Yeah.
embrace it.
Well, and part of a posture of embracing is, I know, kind of a core virtue of yours, which you wrote, you talked about the daily pursuit of humility as the highest virtue for human
Mhm.
growth and spiritual flourishing. So I want you to actually talk even bigger than just humility about flourishing, and specifically dads, thinking about dads flourishing, and how that might weave in with this idea of stretching. Can you just kind of expound a little bit on those themes around fatherhood?
Yeah. Um, wow, you're going big here, brother. Um, so, well, first I would say we were made to flourish. So when you tilt your mind and heart toward flourishing with your intention thinking and your intentions, you are aligning with the power of God's image in us, and for Christ followers, the power of the Spirit in us and between us in terms of his community of his people. So flourishing is about entering into reality that is there already for us, and we just need to tilt our intention towards that. And I think it starts with, I would say, like a mindset, a growth mindset. Like, I'm intended to flourish here, so what do I need then in order to do that?
Hmm.
And this is, I would say, for dads, it's like, you want your kids to flourish, you want your wife to flourish. How about we start with you? And are you doing and choosing what you need to do to be a flourishing human person as a man and as a husband, as a father? So it's like, flourishing for your family or people around you, it starts with you.
Yeah.
So I would just say, dads, hear the call. If you want people to flourish or to be the best dad you can be, how about you start with you,
Mhm.
and you just focus on what that looks like for you,
Yep.
and getting what you need. What do you need in order to flourish? What's getting in the way of flourishing, which is kind of, tilts into the reality of kind of sin and human brokenness, and bad thoughts and behaviors, and like, what do you need to do? And so, having a mindset of flourishing, what's the vision of that? What does that look like? What could that be? And then, what do you need to move towards that? That's what I would
Yeah.
say. Flourishing for family as dads begins with you, dad.
Yep.
Are you flourishing? Are
Yep.
you flourishing? So
And I know for me, one of the blocks to flourishing has been a mind game and a heart game that is actually rooted in some pride and arrogance of
Mhm.
wanting to be perceived or have like seen as I have it together. So a lack of it really I reject some growth because I choose to, even if it's just internal, like it's internal, but it's a posture of like I don't want to be found out. I don't want to be found out, right? And
Yeah.
I'd love for you to, I mean, you can coach me for a moment here, but also just even like expounding on what are some of the other things that you think dads are saying like are stopping us from stepping towards that flourishing.
Yeah. Well, being seeking to be perceived either by others, but I think first and foremost by yourself a certain way that's different than the reality of who you are. I'm like, I mean, you can't get much deeper than that. I mean, that to me is at the heart of humility, which is from my point of view, primarily about seeing ourselves accurately in
Mm,
relation to ourselves, God, and others.
yeah.
Are we seeing what's true, what's reality? And that, and the more we are able to see and embrace reality, which means our limitations, even just what you said, like I'm concerned about how I'm viewing myself or the kind of the gap between the real and the ideal. Um,
Mhm,
I want to live more in the ideal, or show more the ideal, or think I'm more the ideal than I actually am.
mhm,
That's going to get in the way um, of a lot. So I would say that's primary. The second thing would just in my mind would just be your ability to enter into vulnerable spaces of vulnerability.
mhm,
I mean, if you can't do that, or if you choose not to do that, I would say you can do that.
mhm,
So if you have a lifestyle of choosing not to be more vulnerable about the reality, humility precedes vulnerability, and then they start having a kind of a dialectic with one another. The more vulnerable you are, the more humble you can be, because hopefully when you're vulnerable, you receive good things when you're vulnerable, and that helps you to be more honest about yourself and so on and so
mhm,
forth. But
mhm,
I think vulnerability would be the next, like you as a man being more vulnerable about what you actually think and feel, and how you view yourself. Even I'm 51 right now, and as a dad, like I don't ever expect to be in a place where I'm not working on something,
yeah.
or I'm not failing and having to own it. Like I'm just more at a place in life where that's the goal, is to not fail, is to not fail.
Right,
Okay.
right. Yeah.
The goal is to, when I misstep because I have a tummy ache, or like I'm frustrated about something over here and it comes out over here,
Mhm,
that I am quick to own it,
mhm,
and then humble myself, and then be vulnerable, even with my kids, like, hey, I'm sorry that I responded that way. That was wrong of me. And would you forgive me? And kind of working through that with them on a day in, day out basis, which, by the way, on that trailer trip, there were multiple times where I was like pushed beyond my stretching limitations,
yeah.
I would just say. And I had to kind of own it and back up and, okay, what happened? How can I avoid that? Try to avoid that in the future, and then just keep owning it when it got messy.
Hmm.
I would say those two things.
And we talk often about the value of counseling. Go see a Christian counselor.
Mhm.
Vulnerability in that area. We also talk, and that takes a lot of courage. We cheer on dads to
Totally.
be courageous to go meet with a counselor. Best $125 an hour, whatever it costs your counselor.
Right,
It's
right.
so worth it. And then the other thing we encourage is just brotherhood. It's like, let's get out. For me, it was 2 nights ago on a paddleboard. After the kids went to bed, after the girls went to bed, we were out. I was out paddleboarding with a buddy, being very real, which is funny on the water because your voices can travel a long
Yeah.
way. um, but would you say on this topic of flourishing, um, topic of humility, topic of ownership, these topics that we're kind of just hitting the very surface level right now, are there any, if there was a book or two or other next steps that I didn't mention, that I haven't said anything about, anything that you're like, this is something you could take a next step in these areas?
Yeah. Um, well, in terms of books, like some of the writings of John Townsend and Henry Cloud have been really significant for me. Some of their earliest books, for Cloud, it was Changes That Heal. For Townsend, it was Hiding from Love.
Okay.
I'm like, hey, why don't you just start there?
Mhm.
Because those books give you a snapshot into a perspective on who we are as in our character, based on like four developmental capacities that they outline, both from in kind of different ways in those two books, Changes That Heal, Hiding from Love. I think those would be great books to start with to get you thinking more deeply about your heart
Yeah.
in a biblically integrated with kind of psychological insight and perspective. Like it's an integrated perspective where they're taking rich kind of biblical theological perspective and psychological insight, kind of wedding that together in a way that I think, I mean, that's it was very, very helpful for me early on in my growth journey as a person, and then ultimately, as a husband and then dad.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm gonna take us back deep in a few moments here. Let's go. Let's pan back for a moment, and before we get away from the travel trailer, when say you just have 4 or 5 minutes to pass on, you stop, you're filling up gas, you got the rig, and then this dad's like, I want to do that someday. I want to travel with my family. Give me some high level, what starting points, some tips, some tricks, some hacks. Like what
yeah,
are some of the things that you learned in those 4 months of traveling 48 states that you're like, I'd pass this on to a dad that's considering it?
yeah. Get on the same page with your number one traveler, co-pilot, your wife, like get on the same page. If you're not on the same page, I mean, the hardest parts of our trailer trip were when my wife and I, Sheila, when we were like in tension or like just having different when we got mixy, then things, start getting unstable, so I would just say, from the start, how do you stay with your spouse in making decisions and defining like what you do this, I'll do this, and kind of like
Mhm.
working together to kind of navigate doing all you need to do to make a trailer trip like this happen like you needed to. And so you get on the same page with one another, and then make choices daily to stay on the same page.
Mhm.
That means you have a daily connection. Like for Sheila and I would be walking together. So I would just say, do that. To me is like number one.
Thank you so much for joining us for episode 180. The conversation notes, the action steps, the transcripts are going to be at dadawesome.org/180. So you'll be in the loop there. That text message, one more time, if you want to be in the loop with text messages from Dad Awesome, the Dad Awesome nudge, just simply text 651-370-8618. Just text the word dad to that number and you'll be in the loop. Guys, praying for you. Have an amazing start to July as we head into the heat of the summer. Have fun with your kids. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for saying, man, I'm going to be a dad who adds life to the dad life.